So at this point, I will introduce Gary Veselka with Meriplex, and thank you. I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. A special thanks goes out to the AIA member team. You guys for helping support us as an allied member. Really appreciate that. With that, I'll just do a quick introduction of today's speakers. Myself, of course, maybe some of you have seen me. I'm part of Meriplex, and we do managed technology providing work here in Irvine. Looking forward to seeing you guys potentially in another future event. We have Paul Wartenborg, VCISO, which is a virtual security information security officer, and he's a cybersecurity practice leader at Meriplex with a specialty in security and is a certified ethical hacker. So he's a pretty fun guy to work with. Remember, always lock your system when you're leaving your desk. Stephen Paulin, who's with us too, he'll be talking about, he's a cyber specialist at Orion Risk Insurance covering the SoCal area. For more on their bio information, you can find that on the website. So with all due respect, the goal for purpose of today's webinar is to bring awareness and familiarity to all the buzz around cybersecurity. We will be covering a range of topics from threats and risks and best practices and case studies. Additionally, we will discuss how insurance can align with your firms and help mitigate future threats. We have a lot to unwrap here, so without further ado, let's get started. Paul, the Zoom is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Confirm, Gary, that you can see the PowerPoint and the agenda.
Yes,
on this main screen.
I can see it.
All right.
Correct.
All right, perfect. All right, cool. So before I get started, I want to once again thank everybody as well with the AIA team, and of course Gary for putting this together, and then having Stephen join us. Much appreciated. Myself and Stephen have done quite a bit of these for a long time, so we really do enjoy sharing our knowledge and wisdom with everybody. And then in addition, from a housekeeping standpoint, I've asked Gary to kind of keep an eye on the chat window. So if anybody has any specific questions, feel free just to jot those down there. And Gary, feel free to interrupt, or we can wait till the end based on the question. So far. So I think that'll, as interactive as possible. Obviously, we do have a lot to cover. So I do want to make sure we get all the questions answered. So let me just jump right into it. As Gary said, the state of cybersecurity is changing. I've been doing these, presentations, webinars, for decades now, and it always requires additional. These aren't like set it and forget it type of slides. So I typically every few months have to go in and update them because the nature of cybersecurity is changing. So for today, from a learning context standpoint, I do want to give a kind of a high level definition of cybersecurity, and then kind of jump into who are we protecting ourselves against. So really, in short, cybersecurity truly is a practice. It's actually an ongoing practice of protecting your systems, your networks, your data, specifically your data, against cyber threats, including but not limited to, unauthorized access, attacks, damage, ransom, things of that nature. And this involves a lot of different elements, and a lot of elements that are potentially not focused in by a lot of organizations. And we'll cover that today. What we found, a lot of organizations do not look at some of the key pillars of protecting their organization. So with that being said, let's talk about who are these bad guys. I put that in there because that's what Stephen calls them, bad guys. I call them malicious actors. You can call them bad actors. You can call them threat actors. All those terms are common for these bad guys. And I wanted to kind of give you a little overview of who they are and where they come from. So, and they're kind of categorized. So the first one I want to touch on are called nation state sponsored actors. And what those are basically organizations, typically in countries like Russia, North Korea, and China, and any country, I always joke, that ends in the word "stan." They are nation state, which means they are actually financially sponsored by their state to basically provide malicious intent. A lot of these are focused in on potentially cyber warfare against us, but not necessarily. It could be also for financial gain, which gets me into the next category, which are called cyber criminals. And the cyber criminals also typically reside in some of those countries I mentioned, such as Russia, North Korea, and China, of course. And I call them pseudo-state sponsored, meaning they're not necessarily funded by these government organizations, but they are heavily encouraged, and they're not, obviously, there's no situation where US based law enforcement has any ability to do anything about it. So it's important to understand that these criminals that are out there are very well funded, and they have the support of the nations they live in. In addition to that, there's a term called hacktivist, which is a threat actor that's focused more on the political side, or potentially certain causes. So they will hack into systems that that are potentially politically motivated, or it could be potentially a certain focus they're on. Probably not as applicable to here, but I did want to share that. And then there's a concept called script kiddies. Yes, script kiddies actually. And that's a terminology for the vast amount of less experience. It kind of goes back into the if you think of the 13-year-old kid in their parents' basement wearing their hoodie kind of look to it. That's kind of what a script kiddie. They might be very bright, they might have some skills, but they don't have the backing, and they don't have the experience level. So they can't. Yes, they could be dangerous, and I'll explain why shortly. And then finally, I do want to talk about one of the threats that nobody ever talks about, or very rarely talks about, is insider threats. And these are your employees. And what's organizations like, well, like architectural firms, other firms of ours like CPA firms and financial firms, your employees are what make up your firm. They're the most important asset you have within the organization. But with that being said, they're also potentially your biggest threat. And the first thing that comes to mind is, disgruntled employee. Well, and granted, disgruntled employees can be malicious actors. They can cause damage, but that's not even the extent of it. They can A lot of the damage that an insider threat actually carries out, based on the data that we've collected, has been accidental. Making a mistake, clicking on something, deleting folders, things of that nature. So insider threats are also something we do want to obviously key in on. And then I do want to focus, obviously, for firms like yourself. Every organization that we work with has and should be concerned with their cybersecurity posture. And the firms like yourself, it really boils down to your data. Now, when I'm talking to, and I was actually, prior to this meeting, I was reviewing an assessment for one of our healthcare clients. So when we talk about healthcare clients, we talk about protected healthcare information, electronic protected healthcare information. If I'm dealing with one of our DoD-based clients that fall under the Information Trafficking and Arms Regulation, also known as ITAR, they fall under other regulations, and have to obviously protect that data. Now, architectural firms, I think, in a sense, are also unique. The amount of data that you have within the organization, the blueprints, the drawings, the schematics, those documents could be your intellectual property. They could also be in essence used to exploit other opportunities, if it's building based type of. So you can see no firm, especially firms that have a lot of intellectual property, it's critical. So I do want to touch on that, and I know a lot of the focus today, even including my case study, will be based on an architectural firm to kind of give you some context. And then finally, I want to talk about the key industry trends, and really the biggest trend, and the one that's probably has the most impact, is basically COVID and post-COVID, and with the explosion of the work from home initiative. And I won't insert a joke here about that. That's kind of politically sensitive, but obviously people are morphing back to the office. But when the dust settles, I feel strongly that the hybrid approach is going to be left over. So there's still going to be a large population of users working from home, and that presents quite a bit of technical challenges and security challenges. And unfortunately, during COVID, everybody focused on the technical challenges, how to get the organizations working remotely, and very few focused on the how do we make it run remotely and secure. And we're left with that now today. So that's been a big challenge. Um, so let's talk about some of the, and then this presentation will get a little more positive, but I do want to focus in on, hey, what's going on out there? What are your what are the areas that you should be concerned about? And like I said earlier, I'm updating this thing regularly, and so The very first bullet point and I put in phishing and spear phishing. And for those that don't know, phishing is the concept of using email to send to users to get them to basically respond in some sort of fashion with ill intent. That could be everything from trying to get information all the way to into executing a severe ransom attack. And spear phishing is the same as phishing, but it's really more focused in on a targeted attack, where in general phishing, it's people sending email to the masses. I kind of use the joke, um, the days of the Saudi prince email that many of you got, decades ago, or your long lost cousin out of the UK where you've inherited money, trying to get you to put dollars into an escrow account so you can get hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars back. Those type of campaigns are really not out there anymore. And I want to emphasize, besides phishing and spear phishing, there's a concept, and you'll see a video later today. I think it's pretty eye-opening on what's called vishing, VISHING, which is voice solicitation. The other one is smishing, and I'm sure everybody here is getting constant barrages of text on their phone about trying to get you to click on a link. A lot of it's UPS based. Trying to keep my wife from doing that. I think she's on a 2 package a day from Amazon right now. So if she doesn't get her package, all heck breaks loose. So, but all jokes aside, those attacks are becoming much more sophisticated, based on artificial intelligence. And I can't emphasize enough. And I think today's webinar is supposed to be kind of a lesson one. And if we get an opportunity to come back, I'll love to spend more time talking about how AI generated attacks and how they're using AI to simulate attacks is critical. I've already kind of touched on insider threats, and I mentioned in there intentional or accidental is your biggest threat. And what we're seeing is that most organizations do a pretty good job with what I call their external security, but they don't build what's called role-based access control, or the theory of least privileges, meaning why do all users have access to everything in their network? I know a lot of times we might block them out of HR or maybe the executive folder, but does every user need to have access to all the other project folders? Are they working on all the other projects? So organizations that don't do that are in potential threat of an insider potentially doing serious damage. Okay, so malware is probably exactly what you're thinking about. It's really just any type of software or code that's really intentionally designed to, disrupt, damage, or in some cases gain authorized access to your systems. And that's a huge threat. And the delivery of a lot of those malware come through phishing or even spear phishing. So you can see some of these threats kind of go hand in hand. And then finally, ransomware is the most common and probably the most publicized. I don't need to have a raise of hands, but if I did, I would suspect that most people on this call have heard of ransomware because it has been publicly put in the news on various ransomware attacks. And I do want to point out that the ransomware is probably the greatest overall risk to the majority of firms, especially in the small to medium-sized marketplace. And when I do reference small or medium, I'm talking about anywhere from 5 to 250 user organizations, kind of fall into that SMB space, as we like to call it. Those organizations don't necessarily have all the tools in place, and so they're very susceptible to ransomware. And I won't digress too far, but I've done a ton of engagements with not only local law enforcement, but also with FBI and Homeland Security. And I got to work very closely with the FBI when ransomware first hit it's almost 20 years ago. Is when some of the first ransomware attacks were starting to get prevalent. And one of the interesting theories, and I'm not going to get into detail, was the WannaCry ransomware, which is one of the ones that got major notoriety worldwide. The FBI was confident that ransomware attack had the sole purpose of driving up the cost of Bitcoin, because that was the first time that they were utilizing Bitcoin to pay the ransom. And so it was kind of interesting. Like I said, I could get into more detail, but we'll be here all day. I do want to say that ransomware has morphed over time. So the garden variety ransomware in the past was a bad actor would get into your system and they would rapidly encrypt all of your data as fast as they can, and then give you a ransom note saying all your data has been encrypted. And in order to get it back and unencrypted, you have to pay a ransom via Bitcoin. Obviously, organizations got smart and realized having a rock solid backup and business continuity solution was critical. So the ransomware uh, actors or malicious actors got intelligent, and they became a little bit more diligent about it. So instead of coming in and encrypting all of your data rapidly, they'd get in your environment and they would slowly exfiltrate all of your data to a third party system that they control. Then once that was completed, then they would ransom you, realizing that a lot of organizations probably have a rock solid backup system and they can restore, hence not have to pay the ransom. But what if that same malicious actor came back and said, well, yeah, if you do not pay us a ransom, we're going to release all your data to the public. And if you're a company that falls under regulatory requirements, albeit like healthcare, banking, and maybe some of the government regulated organizations, that could be catastrophic, just the fines alone. Some of the privacy laws that have been published over the last 10 years have a lot of teeth in them. And obviously for architectural firms, that's your intellectual property. Your clients would not be pleased, obviously, if your data. So that has forced a lot of people to have to pay the ransom. Third party and vendor risk. I want to touch on this, and it's one of the biggest areas. I don't like to use. I like to use examples that are a lot of times more applicable to the size of organizations, like I mentioned, 5 to 250. But I do want to touch on, you know, where third party and vendor risk come into play. And I'll use the example of I don't know if anybody's heard of this. You'll heard of the second company, a company called Fazio's Mechanical Systems, is an HVAC company, and I should have looked them up. I think they're in the Midwest somewhere. They got famous because their biggest client was Target, and they got breached, and they were able to utilize the connection from the control system from Fazio's into the Target's network, and from there they were able to exfiltrate, I believe, about 40 million debit and credit cards and about 70 million records of customer information. Kind of a big deal. And so that's, once again, an organization can put a lot of energy into shoring up your resources, and then neglect your third party and potential vendor risk. Another one I like to use an example, and this is one that is kind of interesting to me because I happen to know one of the organizations that participate in the forensics for them. But it was a large, at the time, unnamed casino that had a what's called a smart thermometer. This casino that might be Win. I'm not going to say it for sure. You can't hold me to it. I guess this is tape, but that's okay. They basically were able to exploit credentials, common credentials or default credentials on a thermometer. And if you've been to like the Wynn Casino, they have some phenomenal. They have a Shark Tank up front. They have quite a bit of an aquarium that's just amazing. But that has to be controlled. It's very temperatures can't deviate, pH balances can't deviate. So they have some very sophisticated technology. Well, that technology led a malicious actor into the Wynn corporate database where they exfiltrated the entire whale database. And if you're familiar with casinos and you know what the whale database is, that is a very valuable database of very, very powerful and wealthy people. So it is a big risk. And then let's talk about social engineering. I have a video I'm going to show a few slides down. So I'm not going to spend. I want to show it. I think it'll kind of. But really, when you think about like trust, fear, curiosity, those are some of the emotional triggers that most people have, and a social engineering attack is just that. It's not using technology, it's not using code, it's using those triggers that everybody has to basically get things. And like I said, the video is I think kind of eye-opening. And then finally, one of the more common risks that organizations are facing, if I was to have another, looks at a raise of hands, I would suspect that well over 80% of the people on this call have their email hosted at either Microsoft or Google, or even a third party that's using one of their services. Those systems can, in some cases, very easily be compromised. And once your email's been compromised, it gives bad actors the ability to the ability to kind of use social engineering and a couple other triggers to initiate wire transfer fraud, payroll diversion, data theft, those gift card scams everybody's talked about, and all of those aspects. And what those are usually done, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it allows them to initiate what's called a man-in-the-middle attack or an on-path attack, which basically means the malicious actor is going to take control of a email transaction, typically one of financial requirements, and they'll do a lot of different tricky things, like set up what's called doppelganger domains, or they will steal your signature, and they'll impersonate you, and they'll get maybe a vendor or a partner to change the banking transfer information or wire transfer. So so business email compromises are huge right now. So obviously we want to have everybody aware of that. I want to pause real quick. Gary, with I think I saw a question pop up. I want to give anybody a chance if it was applicable.
Nope, nothing. I
Nothing?
did not see.
Okay, no problem. I thought I saw my
Thanks
screen
for checking.
flash, but I'll take
I said read stop.
a quick breath. And so I'm not going to read. I mean, everybody here knows if you have a cyber attack that results in encrypted data, loss of data, these are, I kind of call this my Captain Obvious slide, because obviously it's going to impact the organization. But what I want to really point out, and I'm not trying to, scare, is from a scare tactic, but I personally, and I've been doing this, I might look real young, but I'm not. I've been doing this for decades, obviously many, many decades. And I can count on probably one hand, or maybe one to less than two hands, how many natural disasters that I've had to experience with my clients. I've had a client's building burn. I mean, I'll never forget this. I was on call, and my phone lit up like a Christmas tree with all these alerts for one of my clients, and I called them right away, and they were at their building. It was a manufacturing building, and it was literally burning to the ground, and we had to deal with that. And it was catastrophic to the business. The good news is we had proper backup in place, and we were able to participate. I've been ankle deep in water before. I actually had a client. We're in Southern California, like all of us. It never rains in Southern California, especially in the summer. That was retarring their roof, and they had a freak and a heavy rainstorm. And imagine the whole building. It was like you're in the building and it's raining on you. The water is just coming right through. It was awful. Obviously destroyed not only computer, but it destroyed everything. It was a huge disaster. But like I said, I can count those on pretty much one hand. But I can't say that the same for cyber attacks. We're seeing the influx of cyber attacks grow and grow. And one thing I don't do on my slides, I'm not a big fan of, there's a ton of statistics out there, and they could be geared towards large enterprise, mid enterprise, even small and medium sized businesses. I'm not a big fan of stats. I think that they can be skewed for all the wrong reasons. But what I can say is that our firm at Meriplex, we've seen a huge increase over a period of time. Our secure operations center tracks that data, so we have empirical data. And then I do want to touch on these cyber attacks, these bad actors, these bad people, these bad guys, whatever you want to call them. They pick the worst time to attack. And so, like for example, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we were prepared, because it happens like that every year. They pick holidays, realizing that people aren't as vigilant, or people are away from the office, not paying attention to the alerts. And Meriplex alone, we thwarted hundreds and hundreds of these attacks. But our team was busy during that time of year. I mean, and it's part of the nature of our business. So I do want to touch on that. I'm not, like I said, everybody here knows, your own business. If you were down for 2 or 3 days, or you had loss of data, or data got released to the public, how that impacts you. Only know that. And so that's something that everybody has to just understand. Every business is unique, and that consequence is going to be. That's why I said I'm not a big fan of the statistics itself. So let's talk a little bit. I think a little bit more positive. Hey, what are some key best practices that organizations could be focusing on? And I want to touch in on the what I call the 3 pillars of cybersecurity, and that's of people, process, and technology. And a strong cybersecurity practice relies on all three of these pillars, not just one. And neglecting even one of these could have, and I can give you some examples, and I will, against, basically against your defense. And these create not only a physical, but also a holistic defense against all these cybersecurity threats. So let me start with people. As I mentioned before, and it's kind of be a common theme. These malicious actors, like I mentioned, they're run like organizations. They're run like companies to the point where they actually have HR departments and customer service departments. Um, and what do companies, all companies want to do is they want to run in a profitable sense. So if as an organization, if you're going to attack somebody, either targeted or widespread, what's the least cost way to do that? And it's been determined that your people are the most easiest from a cyber standpoint. Um, and I can't emphasize that enough. And you'll see with that video again today that it's paramount. And so training staff, and that's not just the once a year type training I'm talking about. We offer, and a lot of service providers offer what's called a security awareness training and testing platform that combines very fundamental training and then ongoing testing to see how your users are basically maturing over time. That type of service is critical. Policies, once again, every organization I walk into, put it this way, most organizations have employees review and sign their policy document upon hiring. And if you've been hired recently, you know that it's a inundation of tremendous amount of data. And to what extent are you really paying attention to some of those key policies like internet use, computer use, some of these cyber IT based policy? And the answer is not very often. And if you've been with a firm for 10 years, are you even aware of those policies? So obviously, not just establishing clear policies, but building a policy program where the employees are being retrained, re-signing off on those policies, understanding those policies, and kind of making part of the ecosystem is critical. Second, probably the second most overlooked best practice are our processes. I talked earlier about, the least privilege principle. Why do all users have to have access to everything? The answer is they don't. Access controls, building, role-based access or network-based. There's all these different access controls that can be in place that greatly minimize the impact if somebody gets into your network. Regularly updating software and systems. A huge thing. People who I'll give an example. I literally was reading a report, 10 minutes before this, and we found that the majority of the vulnerabilities in this organization were due to unpatched systems, misconfigurations, and default passwords on most systems. And it's like, these are things that you could do with the process. You can have reviews. I think the same client that I'm talking about had 20 plus active accounts in what's called their domain administrator group. And for those that are familiar with Microsoft and what's called Active Directory, which is the management or privilege system around the Microsoft network, domain admin is like the king of the castle. So if anybody's in that group, they have the keys to the castle. And so when we do a review, we validate everybody. Well, this organization had 20 plus. Some of those were users no longer with the company. Some were third-party vendors that were no longer affiliated. Some of them were actually users that were added there because they needed elevated permissions, not domain admin, but it was easier just to put them in there and not figure it out. So we find that a lot. And once again, that's process. And then I want to touch briefly, and we can have like I said, if we do a second one of these, I want to focus in on what's called the cybersecurity frameworks. And I think everybody on this call has obviously experience in your field. And so I'll kind of use this as kind of an analogy, is that a cybersecurity framework is akin to what you guys would build as a blueprint. And I use that analogy in the sense that you can't build anything, you can't design anything without a blueprint. And so a cybersecurity framework, and there's many frameworks out there that could be utilized. And I kind of teach them as a roadmap, but really they're blueprints on how to basically take your organization and build a cybersecurity practice for your organization. Some of these organizations that you're probably familiar, I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with ISO, You guys do a lot of design work, so ISO is probably something that everybody is near and dear to them. They have one called ISO 27K or 27001, which is the cybersecurity framework. There's one from a company organization called NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. There's ones for the CenterNet. There's a whole bunch of frameworks. Then there's frameworks that are specific to certain industries, like healthcare, for example. So I do want to, so if this like, I'll give you some like pro tips. So one thing when you walk out of this is if an organization says they're secure and you ask them the question, what framework did you use? And they don't have an answer to that. The answer is they're not secure. They haven't fully focused on the people, process, and technology. And then finally, technology. Yes, it's important. Yes, next gen firewalls are important. This is where, especially when you have an internal IT department, and if there's any IT folks on this call, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I've seen this a lot, is that they tend to focus almost all of their efforts on the technology side, or if you have a small service provider as well. So you get all the cool stuff, you get firewalls and endpoint protection and intrusion detection, and all that stuff's great, but it doesn't do much if you're not adhering to the three pillars. So I want to briefly give you a case study that I think it's interesting and it's applicable. I'm going to check time right now. Yeah, I'm doing good on time. So, and I'm going to go quickly through this, but I want to get and I want to be clear is this is actually not. It's a very positive story. Now, the owner of the company wasn't very positive to me when this happened, but I'll explain why. So this was a mid-size. When I say mid-size, this was about a 60-person architectural firm, architectural and engineering firm. They specialized in pneumatic conveying, and they were a long time client of mine. I met them through an event that we actually had an FBI speaker, and the president came to me and said, "Hey, this is like the second webinar I've seen, and this goes back a few years. I'm just super concerned that we've never really focused on this. What can we do?" So you fast forward, we got engaged. We did a comprehensive security risk assessment, and we put them into a program. We worked with their internal IT team, and over time, we built a relatively mature cybersecurity practice. So you fast forward about 3 years, and one of their users, if you see the picture on the left, got an email from a partner that had the partner signature. There was nothing about that email that seemed funny. It got through our secure email platform, so it wasn't tagged as anything, and it had a document attached to it, and the document was labeled as .rtf, which stands for rich text format. And for those that are my age or maybe even a little bit older, probably do remember the days when Microsoft Word was not the only word processor in town. Back then we had WordPerfect, and Ashton Tate, I think, had WordMade. There was about a half a dozen industry wide, and so the RTF format was built to allow people to transfer documents and not worry about if they had Word or WordPerfect. So it was common. So this document was labeled .rtf. So it got through our spam filter. The user got it. They recognized or at least they thought they recognized the email. I'll kind of tell you that the email was not actually from their partner. It was from someone that actually copied the partner's domain through what's called a doppler. They had a domain name that was in close proximity. It was basically misspelled, but they didn't notice that because they wouldn't notice that. So when you open up a document in Word, if it's and this document, by the way, wasn't an actual RTF document, it was actually a Word docx, just relabeled. So when they bring it up, Word has this really cool feature that says, "Hey guys," and it's kind of small, maybe you can't see it, but it says, "Hey, be careful. If you get something from the internet, make sure it's safe to review. Otherwise, you're in protected view. There's nothing this document can do to you right now." And it shows the very first page of the document. Now, in this case, to protect the client, I actually created this document by myself to kind of simulate what they saw. And basically, this is what the user saw, and they felt trust, which is one of the key social things that can be used in a phishing attempt. So they clicked enable editing, and as soon as they clicked enable editing, it had immediately ran a macro, which was a macro virus, and that virus in itself didn't trigger anything on the local machine because it was a macro. It was very simple. The one thing I didn't point out, this is a very simple but very elegant attack. And what it started doing was encrypting their local data. So it was a ransomware attack, and it was getting through the user's file or the local systems of that user, when that user actually kind of was going back and forth, didn't really pay attention to the document. I think they said they were going to give that person a call. When it kind of like they remembered some training they said. They said, I think I made a mistake, is what they said. And so they picked up the phone and called our help desk. Literally within seconds of them calling, the ransomware completed encrypting their local My Documents and desktop data, and was attacking the first available share, which we had systems in place that got triggered exactly when that happened. It actually had the behavior of a ransomware, so alerts were going to our operations center at the exact same time. So our team was very rapidly able to uh, isolate, and the system had an automation built into it, so that user's machine was immediately locked down, and we were alerted to that at the exact same time she was calling in. And then I'll kind of fast forward. So we initiated incident, security incident response. It took us about 2 hours to ensure that not only do we physically pull her machine off the network, restored the data, which is a very small amount of data that was changed. It was actually shadow protected. But we took the time to validate and do a forensic to ensure that, because if anybody here has been through a security incident like that, they know that it in essence can bring the whole network down. I mean, everybody could be impacted, and you can't, even if you can restore data, you can't let people back on the network until you're 100% sure. So it took us about 2 hours of that. In the meantime, we built a new computer or new image for that user, took their system, and we basically put it into our sandbox. And then we built out our what we call our after action report, or our post-mortem, whatever you want to call it, and our lessons learned. And like I said, I'm going to skip through a lot of the details, but the bottom line was, we learned that we needed to have a little bit more sophistication in our secure email platform, hence looking at business email compromises. And since that time, the service providers have really ramped up, and they look for that kind of stuff. We obviously reemphasized training, the whole concept of validate before you open something. But I'll never forget when the owner came in, and this person was committed. His first question to me was, and I want to use the exact language, how in the heck did this ever even happen? And the point we made was, even with all the effort that you put in, you were committed to security, you did all the right things, stuff still happens. But the key thing that came out of this was that the level of impact. One user was down for about 4 hours. The whole organization was down for about 2 hours. The loss of data was just relegated to that user's desktop and My Docs, and it was just transitory data. They had a few files they were working on. So the total financial loss to the organization was significantly less than it could be. And like I said, if we do this again, there's a concept, it's a military concept called left a boom and right a boom. And really what that means is, it's a military concept that basically says, based on the amount of time you prepare before there is an event. In the case of military, that could be an attack or an explosion. In the case of cyber, it's a cyber event. That it has a exponential effect right of explosion or right of event. And what we were able to demonstrate to that client was, you put a lot of time and money into this. And if you look at other organizations that have been through ransomware attacks, the impact and the overall cost of yours was mitigated greatly. I've seen some crazy stats that sometimes being unprepared, or what I call the head in the sand ostrich syndrome, can result in anywhere from 10 to 1,000x cost by not preparing. So that's why it's so critical to repair. And so I'm happy to talk more details about this event. Like I said, I actually just read up on it right before this, because it's been a couple of years since I looked at that, and I'm kind of proud of it. So I'm gonna show a video right now, and I think we're still tracking time wise. I promise this video, it's based on social. I think it'll be kind of eye-opening. So without further ado, let me start it up.
Hackers are everywhere. From
Can everybody hear that okay? Gary, was that it? Can you hear it?
Yep.
Okay, just I'll make sure.
Ashley Madison to JP Morgan, from Jennifer Lawrence to the federal government, our Biggest celebrities, corporations, and institutions have all been the targets of devastating cyber attacks. I wanted to see how bad a hack can get, so I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas at DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year, and see what they found. This might not have been the best idea. DEF CON is the biggest hacker convention of the year. It's a place where thousands of hackers come to hear talks, to demonstrate their newest hacks. It's actually a place that's so dangerous to be on the internet that they tell you to turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth on your phone, and they tell you not to use the ATMs too, because those could be hacked as well. This is the DEF CON ballroom. It's sort of the main room where things are happening, and it's pretty wild. I think this is car hacking village. This car is locked. Can you get me in?
I'll unlock it for you. Should be good.
Hacking is no longer like this fringe activity, and if you are at DEF CON, there's a good chance that you're here because you want to learn what could happen to you or your company.
Anyone here first time in the SCCTF? Holy crap.
I invited Chris to hack me with his team, but they're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
We help people with human security issues by testing vulnerabilities for like a network test, but it's for the people network. We test those vulnerabilities, see where the holes are, and then help people learn so they can patch them.
Can we try some of this? Can we try some?
Yeah.
See if it works?
Yeah, we probably could have our star visher here make some phone calls as
Let's do it.
Sure. Do you want to do a sample phishing call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice solicitation, and basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Who are you gonna call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider
Okay.
and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna spoof from your number, so it's gonna look like it's calling from you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. my husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry. I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds,
gmail.com?
Jessica gets my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account. Okay, my
Jessica
name is
uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry, so there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my
Thank you
password.
so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right, thank you.
Holy shit. So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yes.
I really thought that my cell phone company would protect me. I mean, like, this is the most basic stuff, and they're not doing it. And if they're not doing it, you know all these other businesses aren't doing it either.
How was that? Anybody? I've seen that video quite a bit, and every time it kind of makes me laugh to some extent, but also understand that. And as part of it, as Gary mentioned earlier, as a certified ethical hacker myself, I get the opportunity to participate in social engineering. Is something that I've always gravitate towards because I feel like it is effective, and I can give examples after examples of some very large organizations, not only cell phone companies, but insurance organizations that I've been able to, social engineer and get data and things like that out of. So one thing I do want to point out is, she said it very casually, but I don't know if anybody picked up on I'm going to spoof this number as it's yours. If anybody's interested, spoofing numbers is not rocket science. Anybody with a web browser can set that up and spoof numbers. So that in itself is and everybody here I'm sure gets a lot of spoof numbers for that. So without, I don't need to explain social engineering. I think that video does a great job of kind of showing
Hackers are
of what that is. So I'm going to touch quickly on some tools and resources. Then I've got one more slide before I turn this over to Steve. But I think I've already mentioned, there's tons out there, so much available. I even went online and looked up some of your industry, both the civil engineering and the architectural side, and there's tons of resources out there. Um, Obviously, but nothing beats the frameworks. And so the frameworks are designed for that purpose. And then of course, once again, Captain Obvious, organizations should be using some of the very specific tools. And one of the ones I like to touch on is advanced endpoint protection. When someone says, "Oh, I've got a antivirus. We're running like the free version of this or the Windows version." I get cringy because there's so much better technology now that have behavior based, they have AI, they have user based analytics. They do such a better job. So obviously you got to stay up with the times. And then password. I was talking to someone the other day and they told me they had I was my Uber driver actually, told me he had 125 passwords. And I'm like, oh no, 125 accounts with passwords, and he uses the same password on all of them. And I'm like, well, you realize if that password, and he goes, well, and he joked that it's one of his dog's names, but it's the dog's no longer with us. And I said, oh, that's awful. You got to have a password management in place. That's going to protect you along with, areas of secure management. So before I give this over to Steve, I want to leave you with like, what are some key steps that all organizations should do? And if some of you have already done this, awesome. That's awesome to hear. And I'm always happy to talk to people on their cyber maturity, see where you're at. And obviously my goal is to help as much as possible. That's why we do these webinars. But the very first thing an organization needs to do is you need to assess what you got. You need to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. And if you did one 3 or 4 years ago, or even a year ago, there's a reason why HIPAA in the HIPAA security rule requires healthcare organizations to do these annually. FTC safeguards, all of these regulatory requirements require organizations to go through that. Second thing is update if you have them. Now, a lot of firms don't. If you have I should say either build one or update the one you have. This is the most critical plan. If a cybersecurity incident occurs and you haven't documented it, tested it, staged it on a consistent basis, at the very least annually, it's going to be chaos, utter chaos, and it's going to be impactful. So, 3, train your team on cybersecurity. I can't emphasize enough. It's probably one of the least costly services I know we offer, and has the biggest bang for your buck. And it's paramount to our cybersecurity offering. And then number 4, and I kind of say this to anybody, like I said to is be smart about your resources. Everybody have limited budget. There's not a single organization I've ever met that said, I don't care how much money you spend. Everybody says, we have a limited budget. So be smart about that and just don't focus on the technology. Also focus on the people and process. And as I mentioned before, review your contracts with vendors and partners. When I say review, really review your systems and how they're implemented, and have they taken the necessary. You're well within your right to require your vendors to provide their documentation on how they're securing your assets within their environment, or if they're connected to you. So up to this point, I've been mostly focused on obviously the 3 pillars, really how to greatly minimize the cyber incident. But now I'm going to have Steven's going to jump on, discuss really just as importantly, how the cyber insurance focuses on both, loss prevention, financial protection, and recovery. So with that being said, Steven, I'll jump to your slide and let you take it from here. Steven, you might be on mute. Steven, you there? Hey, Gary, you want to check with Steven, make sure he gets off mute?
Yep. Here, I'll ping him.
Yeah.
That's odd. Oh,
Okay,
there he is.
there we
There
go.
Whew.
Sorry about that. It says can't start the video because the host has stopped.
We hear, you should see your, used to see your presentation, Steven,
Yeah.
your, yeah.
Well, people do say, Steve, you know, you've got a face for radio. So that may be the best outcome for everybody here. But yeah, let's, hello, everyone. And Paul, I really want to thank you for the valuable perspective about the changes of opening, operating in the digital world, and absolutely love that video. I thought that was a great representation of how easy these things can happen. And so the insidious nature of these cyber bad guys requires an immense amount of diligence to prevent and mitigate an incident that can have far-reaching financial and reputational consequences. So if you move to the next screen, Paul. So these are the topics we're going to be going over. The cyber risk journey, and we'll really be looking at, as I mentioned or shown before, cyber past, present, and future to give you a real holistic view of where we've been, where we are, and where we think we're going. The threat landscape will really tie in with how insurance coverages respond to many of the things that Paul had mentioned. We'll get into the cyber coverages, and by the way, you'll be happy to know that I have just enough insurance information not to make your eyes glaze over. We'll have a couple of claim examples, tips about traps to avoid. What does the current cyber insurance market look like? Positioning to get the best coverages, and a summary, and then we'll end with the Q&A. Paul? We'll go to the next one.
You should have that now, Steve.
We go to the next screen.
Yeah, you're on the cyber risk journey right now.
Okay. So what I like to say is there is no destination. Cyber is a journey. It's really a process of constant adaptation, and attack vectors keep changing. And I still hear people saying that cyber is an emerging risk. However, when we're closing in on close to 3 decades of issuing policies, it really is a maturing risk. So to give you some context, we'll go back to 1997, which is when the first cyber policy was issued. And it was really considered, it was called data breach and privacy protection, which was really the major concern at that time. Being able to steal information, and from that be able to steal identity and go out and get loans and things of that nature under the individual's name. 2001 was when my first experience was with cyber. It happened to be, I had 3 particular instances with a couple clients with stolen data, stolen credit card information, as well as stolen identity. And then curiously enough, at about the same time, with the firm I was with, I was invited to come in and participate in a program to work with Lloyd's of London to put together one of the really first comprehensive cyber policies. 95, we really started to see an increase in viruses and techniques to aggressively extract privacy information and data. And then between 05 and 19, cyber was really just a sleepy line of coverage. It was, growing at a moderate rate. Claims were being paid out, and everybody was just kind of going along with the experience at that time until 2019. And as Paul alluded to, ransomware was starting to gain some momentum. And that year, ransomware came out hot and heavy with a lot of traction and was doing a lot of damage out there for businesses. Then what happened in 2020, and Paul referred to this as well, you'll remember in March when we went to work from home and everybody was scaling up to work virtually, but there were so many vulnerabilities in the security it was just a heyday for the bad guys to get in and do all sorts of havoc. It's just a massive opportunity to take advantage of these security gaps. And as a result, in 2022, because of these claims, rates increased from 50 to 300%. And then since then, we're now in a stabilized rate structure. And as I'll show you a little later, we have been seeing some increase in frequency and severity, and there's a belief that the second half of this year rates will start going up. We just don't know to what effect. Next screen. Okay, the threat landscape. So we've got 4 of them here. These are actions of people, and really this is clicking on a malicious or an infected link. And that could be a trigger for coverage. Over on the right, we've got system failure, where really what happens is equipment or software fails to stop an attack, leading to a voluntary shutdown. Or we could go over on the bottom left, where we seem to be the most common activity is malicious and criminal acts, social engineering and ransomware. And then on the far right, external events, third-party vendor breach. And this is something that's really been on the rise. Next screen. So again, as I mentioned earlier, prevention and mitigation are paramount and required to avoid the flaws that I previously showed, close skill gaps and improve behavior. And so what we have here on the right-hand side is you have a cyber threat, which is the possibility of a malicious attempt to damage or disrupt a computer network or system through a vulnerability. And this is a weakness in the IT system that can be exploited by an attacker to deliver a successful attack to access assets. And those assets are really anything that can be used to produce value in your organization. So as an organization's goal is to be cyber resilient. So on the right side, when you have the combination of preventative measures, mitigation measures with the ultimate backstop, this is what insurers want from their policyholders. And again, just a little more description here. Resilience is just the ability to withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, such as an attack that compromises a system, so that you are able to continue your cyber resources. So resiliency is really intended for you to be able to continue to operate at as maximum level as possible, as opposed to being shut down until you can pay your ransomware or don't want to pay the ransomware and try to get back to where you were 10 days, 2 weeks, a month later. The next screen. So as promised, here's the really high level coverage that we have here on insurance. So the cyber policy is divided into 2 sections. What we have here in the next page will be first party. And this is like a property claim, a homeowner's claim. So if you have damage to the home or you have loss to the belongings inside, that's the direct payment that you'll receive from the insurance company. And it's really primarily where most of the dollars are spent when there is a claim. But we'll get into the last slide on this. There is also a third party, but that responds to legal actions. So when you have a breach, the first thing we have are your forensic investigation. And this is bringing in an outside specialist. And like I like to say, they shine the flashlight in the dark corners of your network to find out what the bad guys did, how they perpetrated it, how they got in, and maybe the bad guys are still in there, but it basically pays for the cost to contain the damage and investigate the cause and the scope of the breach. And it's expensive, maybe starting out at $700 an hour. If we move to the right, loss of digital assets, this could be your electronic data restoration expenses. So you have a loss, and just because the site has been ransomware and shut down, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been any damage to the data that you have in there. So there's likely a chance that you're going to lose data due to the system damage from the computer virus or the unauthorized access. And so that needs to be rebuilt. And as Paul mentioned earlier, offsite backups are, extremely valuable in being able to be a resilient organization, so you can overcome some of those obstacles of the data that's been damaged. On the bottom left, you have security events costs, and that's to reimburse the cost of customer notification, credit monitoring, public relations expenses. And there are, California, there are laws, that require these type of things to be done when it occurs. So these can be very costly as well. And over on the right-hand side is cyber business interruption extra expense. So, maybe 6 years ago, prior to ransomware becoming very pervasive, all of my clients would have $1 million of loss of business income, which basically says if you're down, you can't operate, then the insurance company will pay you up to $1 million for the loss of income that you're able to verify during that time. And that amount could be for construction, architects and engineers, manufacturing, distribution. It was pretty much the same. But ransomware changed the whole dynamic because by shutting down an operation for a length of time, I've been recommending my clients to increase their coverage and limits, based on what they believe their potential would be. And there's some great resources out there that we use to help quantify this. So you really are taking a lot of guesswork out of it and being able to come up with a range of numbers, and then the business owners, based on that modeling, could determine what direction they want to go and how much. We'll go to the next one. And then what we have is, as we've seen a lot of discussion about, extortion or ransomware. And this and fraudulent funds transfer are the two primary areas that we're seeing where the bad guys are monetizing their activities. But also a third party is starting to come on strong. But again, with ransomware, the organization is paying money as a result of being denied their network. So they're really not able to transact any business at all. And that could be for architects and engineers, you're not able to go through your projects, access data, your plans, your billings, and that type of information. So it could be very debilitating. Fraud funds transfer, and this is simply the wrongful transfer of funds to a third party from your account at a financial institution. And that's where social engineering comes into play, and we'll talk about an example of that shortly. Computer fraud, similar to fraudulent funds transfer, but that's where the bad guys have actually come in and have been able to manipulate the system, causing money to be delivered to an unknown party from one of your financial institutions. And then social engineering is using human interaction to influence someone into acting inappropriately, often by breaking normal security procedures. And the most common item, as we saw in the video, is being able to get somebody to give up their password or log on information. And once a bad guy is able to get in the system, then they've got free reign to wreak havoc. Next one. A data breach. Okay, so now what we're talking about here is actually, this should be third party. I apologize for that. So these are going to be individual third party that are going to bring litigation against your organization. And it could be a data breach where there's been unauthorized access and the dissemination of private information, including credit card. And I'm sure if I would imagine all of you at some time has received a letter from an organization or institution that you do business with saying, we've been hacked, we believe your information has been stolen, and we're going to give you these various items, which are basically what they're required to do under law. And then similarly, you've got the employee privacy data, which is a breach of that information, which could include bank account, social security number, dates of birth, where you live, phone numbers, things of that nature. And also want to mention that the network and privacy liability is there is a growing preponderance of organizations that are requiring organizations to do different things. So if you're somebody that does business in Europe, you're going to be part of the GDPR, which is their privacy legislation, or here in California, we've got the CCPA and the CPRA that need to be complied with. Next. This is basically tips on cyber traps. So when a cyber application is completed, there will be a signature by, could be the CFO, the president, the CEO. But what that signature does is the wording is such that it says, all this information in the policy becomes a warranty to the contract, which is often done for this directors and officers, employment practices liability. You don't have anything like this on an auto or a homeowner's policy. But what happens is that application becomes part of the contract. And if you've made representations in there that aren't correct, then if you happen to have a claim that's specific to that area of the application, and they realize that they had underwritten you based on something that you had stated which is not true or incorrect, they can deny the claim or rescind the policy. So that is really essential to understand. There's no coverage for post-event services not authorized by the insurer. So previously I talked about the forensics. I always make sure at the very beginning to tell our clients when we deliver a policy that these are some of the traps that you need to be aware of. And you know, you don't blame the organizations. There's that skull and crossbones or whatever the bad guys have put on the site saying you're locked down, and they say, oh shoot, man, we gotta get somebody on this and figure out what the problem is and how can we correct it. The first call really needs to be me and the 800 number at the insurance company, because the insurance company has put together a team of expert resources, including forensics and and attorneys and things of that nature, to come in and do precisely that. So what you don't want to do is go off and do it on your own, because you're not going to be paid for those expenses. And you have to rely on the insurance company. And of course, cyber, just because of the nature of its loss, it's critical that you start getting action on this immediately. Understand the insurer's MFA requirements. I would imagine that many of you, if not all, have multi-factor authentication for email, or at least email, and that's a dual process of logging in to your network or to your email. There's been a lot of confusion, and honestly, it's not all the part of the individuals that are filling out the policy. And I've seen in some circumstances where the insurance company has not been effective in communicate what they're requesting. But generally, when insurance companies are asking about MFA, they're not just asking about email. They want MFA on all aspects of access to the network, including from endpoints, and that could be tablets, laptops, mobile phones, as well as privileged users. And then compare renewal policy wording. So these policies, their wording will change periodically. And generally, if you are renewing with the same company, there'll be a notification on that. But where this is critical is if there is a change from company A and the renewal goes over to company B, that needs to really be vetted fairly closely. 10 years ago when I compared insurance policies, it was pretty high level. How much is the limit? What's the deductible? Are they covering all these? Are there any sublimits? And then we're done. Now we access a database that does a very good job of contrasting and comparing wording in all the different aspects of the policy. So that's a great way to make sure that this problem could be avoided. Restricted access, again, that's where your security measure to limit access to proprietary areas. It could be accounting, sensitive data, but you want to make sure that similar to MFA, that you're identifying all those different areas that actually is on. Callback requirement. This specifically refers to fraudulent funds transfer. And again, we'll look at a example shortly, but what this says, what this entails is generally a person in accounting who has the ability to make payments will get a request saying from a known supplier saying that, oh, we've changed our account number, and that $100,000 that you owe us in the next couple of days, we need you to send it to this new bank account number. And that happens a lot. And what the insurance companies are now saying, because they paid so many of these claims, is your first order is to call up the known number of the known individual at the known supplier that you've been working with to get a verbal authorization if that is true or not. If not, you don't send the money. If you do, then you're not covered. Choice of counsel, really quickly, what we like to see is if you have a cyber attorney that you're very comfortable with and have a lot of trust on, they could be added to the claims panel so that if you do have a situation, then you're working with somebody that you already know and trust. And the last item is cloud services. A lot of people believe that, oh, all of our system is in the cloud, therefore we have no responsibility for any hacks that we get. And that's not true. You can go through Azure, AWS, and all those have limit their liability to the fullest if there is an event like that. So you can't get out of it. You've still got to be diligent in protecting your data. Next one. Okay. Here's a real life example of architects and engineers ransomware. And we have a situation where, just as I talked about earlier, so you have an employee that opens an email attachment containing a virus. And then once that's open, the encrypted virus was spread, causing the insured to lose access to their whole network. The hackers then demanded payment in Bitcoin of, it was $50,000, it's actually pretty low. And pardon me. And the business just came to a standstill, and operations could not continue in any capacity. And as a result, They had no phones, no email, no ability to work on projects and issue invoices. And so they went ahead and paid the $50,000 in ransomware, and the forensic investigators were able to recover the vast majority of the data, fortunately, from their paperless system. But it really took 10 days. And I think the cost of that outside of the ransomware was close to $150,000. And then the architects and engineers, the fraudulent funds transfer, really easy. I get a call at 6:30 p.m. A client saying he'd been duped into sending $800,000 to a supplier's new bank account. It was fake, and he never recovered the money. End of story. So that's a tough way to learn that experience. So what I'll do is, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next screen, Paul. Cyber insurability. Subsequent to the spike in claims during COVID, underwriters identified that they really need to institute some really key prevention techniques as requirements for business to get coverage. And this is what they came up with on new and renewal. So MFA was right at the top of the list. Again, endpoint detection and response, weekly segregated backups, again, completely separate from the network. Dual authorization for any wire transfers. In this case, it was over 25,000. Employee security awareness training and testing, which absolutely is fabulous because we call our workforce the human firewall. And by being able to be trained and tested and understand what to look for and how to respond, will really mitigate a lot of potential activities. And then encrypt data at rest and in transit. Next one. Pardon me, just getting a drink of water. So insurance placement best practices. And this is a compendium of items that I've developed over a period of time. And one of it is basically enough. Educate yourself in terminology. You know, I use the term bad guys, but you heard Paul mention hygiene and in terms of that nature. So if you're going to be able to communicate with the various resources and insurance company, it's good to know what the key terminologies are. And identify your top exposures to loss. Everybody's got what I call their gold, those things that are, you know, absolutely of utmost importance that you need to have, you don't want anybody else to have, but you've got to have access to that because they're mission critical. Know your level of cybersecurity relative to the insurance requirements, which I had mentioned before. And the insurers will generally do an external scan of your network to identify various things like an open port, but I'll get to the internal assessment in just a moment. Allow time to implement needed security measures. There could be issues with budget, money, technical ability, capacity, and it could take 3, 6, 9 months to get some of these together so that you are in a position to be insurable by an insurance company. So you should be aware of that. Run models to determine coverage limits, which I mentioned before. Complete the application with your managed security service provider. Obviously, they're going to be very well informed on your system, how it works, and they can help dot the I's and cross the T's so that you're not in a position providing inadequate information. And again, qualify as many yes and no questions as possible, because this will all be prepared into a very comprehensive narrative for the insurance company. Now, I put in bold, include the internal risk vulnerability assessment. This is something that I've been a huge proponent of for many, many years. And what this does is it complements the external, but the internal is, again, shining the flashlight into the dark corners to find out what vulnerabilities exist is there somebody in the system already? And from that, you can get a wonderful report that'll show you where your network is, what needs to be fixed. It'll qualify that with costs. And if you're in the IT department and you're looking to budget, this is a great tool to say, hey, this is what we found, and we would need to allocate X amount of dollars into this particular area. But it's a great way to really feel comfortable that you know where your disabilities are and how to move forward. Know what your go-to-market strategy is, and that's really, your broker sitting down and telling you, how to approach the market based on your particular situation. It's always a good idea to eyeball the application before it goes out, and then again, get granular with the policy wording so that you're knowing you're getting what you think you're getting for the renewal, or if you're changing coverages. And if you can, develop a long-term relationship with the underwriter, and that's very helpful as well. Next one. I'm gonna skip over this, but really quickly, what this basically shows you here is the squiggly line on the top shows you for the year over year where rates have been from last December to this December. And it's fluctuated in a very narrow spectrum. Rates have been up 2%, a little under 6% average. And that will tie into the next screen that talks about the state of the current insurance market. It's very competitive. More insurers have come into the market. It continues to be a growing line of coverage. There's good capacity. That means if you have 3 million in coverage, but you want 5, you can get that, as opposed to a few years ago when you had 5 and you could only get 3. Policy terms, again, rates are moderating under 1%. There is some restricted wording, but the nature of the competitive market is allowing you to negotiate the wording, deductibles, and amounts of coverage. So it's really a buyer's market right now, which is refreshing from where it was a few years ago for buyers. Next one. Just a couple of quick numbers on where we're heading. Cyber is expected to explode, as you see here. Just to give you some context to the numbers for 22, 23, 24, and 25. 23, we're just about 17 billion global premium. 2004 is expected to close out about 20. 25 about 21, and then on up to what we're seeing there. But the market drivers are interesting. We are seeing an increase in frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks, which ties in to the likelihood of rates going up in the second half of this year. Evolving data protection regulations and compliance requirements. Greater reliance on digital technologies and data. A growing awareness about cyber risks, and the expanding cyber risk landscape due to remote work and cloud adoption. Next one. So really briefly, in 2025, these are where we've seen our top threats. We haven't talked about the AI-powered cyber attacks. Depending on which side of the coin you are on, companies are using AI and have resources to help them use AI to ward off attacks. The bad guys are doing the same thing, figuring out how to use those capabilities to attack more effectively and efficiently. And our plan is to go deeper in this area and a couple of others when we do our Cyber Risk 2.0 program in the future. Again, ransomware, no news there. It's happening, it's going to happen, and it's going to continue to happen. Phishing and social engineering will be a very important element of ways to get in the system and implant ransomware. As Paul said, we can't overlook insider threats. And we'll talk more about that later. And then supply chain vulnerabilities is something that's coming on very strong. Next screen. So again, I think just in summary, in the news, you hear about the big companies that are getting hacked and what's happening. But the reality is it's the small and medium-sized businesses are particularly vulnerable. Those organizations may not have the capacity, technical expertise, the budget to do what's needed to do. Bad guys know this, and that's why they're going after mid-size. Moving down, I stressed, and this awareness is really hitting home with businesses. This is not an IT issue or a software problem, but it's a business problem for the whole company. And cyber risk needs to be elevated to the level as any other risk in the organization, whether it's auto, liability, workers' compensation. And so therefore go to the market with a very strong plan, as we talked about earlier. And again, as I mentioned, this is a problem that can't be solved. There is no destination. It's a journey, but one that could be effectively managed with prevention and mitigation activities. Focus must be on resilience and the ability to adapt to adverse conditions to continue operating, and carefully vet your insurance forms. So I think that will end it for me.
Well, thank
That
you
was
for all
an
the
excellent
kind words.
program. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank you so much.
Appreciate it.